fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Falcoholic Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Knight, here during a slow part of the NFL calendar. We haven't had a lot of news to talk about. The content mines have run dry, so to speak, but we did actually get some interesting tidbits from ESPN's Mykal Rothstein about the team's second OTA session last week. There was a practice that was open to the media that Rothstein was able to attend. He gave some great notes. There was we did a write-up on it on thefalcoholic.com if you want to get the full breakdown and notes, as well as to see Rothstein's notes, but I figured I'd come on and break down some of the most notable things, with the caveat first, of course, that we are talking about OTAs. There's very little to no contact allowed. It's not even padded. Sometimes they wear helmets, sometimes they don't. So, it's all very early in the process. Don't get too wrapped up in any of these notes, but there are some interesting things about the depth chart. Coach Smith said a couple things that were interesting. And look, there's not much else going on. It's fun to talk about. So, quick show today just to break down some of the interesting things that we learned from last week's OTA session. The first one being that Marcus Mariota in this session was by far the better quarterback, which sort of balances out what we've heard previously, which was that Ridder was very impressive. This was a weaker day for Ridder, but again, it's not shocking when we see these guys together. Marcus Mariota, particularly when working with the starters and particularly early on, is going to be the better quarterback. I would be shocked if he wasn't, for a lot of reasons, right? Mariota has played in the scheme before. He's an 8-year NFL veteran, and despite the fact that he was most recently a backup for a few seasons, this is a guy that is just under 500 in terms of winning percentage. I think he's had 3 winning seasons as a starter, and was the number 2 overall pick. So he's very talented, very experienced, and has experience in the scheme. So I think Mariota's going to hit the ground running. It's why I think he's going to be the week 1 starter. Will Ridder overtake him at some point? We'll see. But today, Rothstein actually charted the throws for both guys. So by his numbers, Mariota was 8 out of 10, so 80% completion rate. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think the practice was mostly like a red zone sort of situation. So yeah, Mariota, 8 of 10, 3 TD, 1 int. That's pretty darn good. He really liked how Mariota's throws were looking. I think he called them really crisp passes. And he threw a touchdown to Kyle Pitts, which I know everyone will be interested in hearing about, particularly if you're about to do your fantasy drafts. Buy Kyle Pitts, by the way. Buy Kyle Pitts as much as you can. And Ridder, on the other hand, was 1 of 6, so not as many throws. He did throw his 1 completion was a touchdown, however, and there was also an interception, as well as a dropped pass that I believe would have been a touchdown. So not the crispest day for Ridder, but particularly in red zone stuff, that's going to be tough for him. And considering that he's been one of the most impressive players at the previous practices and rookie minicamp and the previous OTAs and all that stuff, it's really not something to be concerned about. Just a weaker day for Ridder and a pretty darn good one for Mariota. So that was interesting, and sort of confirms what I think we're all sort of expecting, which is that Mariota's probably going to win the starting job, and that's not a bad thing. But we want Ridder to sort of push him and compete, even though he's probably not going to be the week 1 starter. But I hope that Ridder can look good in the preseason and get the chance to start at some point, just so we can see what we've got there. It's important. But that was the quarterback situation. In terms of really impressive standout plays, Rothstein particularly called out Mykal Walker for having a very good practice. He had a diving interception, so that's always nice to see. It was off a tip pass. Linebacker Rashawn Evans tipped it. Mariota was targeting, I guess, wide receiver Kaderil Hodge on the play. So Evans tipped it, and Walker laid out to get it and pick that up. So that's obviously nice to see. Walker was playing with the starters. So this is really his year. I think this is his third year now, going into his third year. So, Walker needs to get on the field and start if he wants to take over a starting role. And I think there's certainly an opportunity for him to do that long term here. Deion Jones, we'll see what his status is, if he sticks with the team through the whole training camp during the season, or if he is traded at some point. With his surgery and not being fully healthy yet, probably the trade is going to have to be postponed until training camp, once we know he can pass a physical and that sort of thing. But, we'll see what happens with that. Certainly doesn't seem like Deion Jones is going to be here long term, though. And then Rashaan Evans looks like he's going to be a starter, but again, he's only on a one-year deal. Does he stick around past this season? We'll see. The other player who really stood out to Rothstein was on offense, and it's an unexpected name, Felipe Franks, but not at quarterback. It was at tight end, I guess, or wide receiver, whatever you want to call him. He had, a spectacular sliding touchdown reception during those aforementioned red zone drills. So it's nice to see Franks sort of taking to his offensive, athlete role a little bit better. And I guess Rothstein said the entire offensive sideline sort of went crazy and, rushed the field. So it is meaningful, I think, and Rothstein pointed this out. The offensive players really love Franks. They were excited for him to make the play. So it seems like he's fitting in with the skill guys, with the other offensive weapons. So that's good to see. And I think it's important for Franks to be able to play those other positions, because I don't know that the Falcons are going to keep a third quarterback at this point with Ritter here. And, with how the practice squad works now, you really don't necessarily have to keep a third quarterback if you're not worried about him getting poached, because you can always elevate. You can, elevate guys for games, and you can protect guys on the squad and all this. So it's not a guarantee that they'll keep three quarterbacks, but if Franks does play tight end and play a lot of special teams, they could theoretically carry him as the fourth tight end, or they could carry him as the third quarterback, but with the understanding that he's going to play a lot of teams and play some tight end as well. It makes it a little easier to swallow that. But, doing the math on the roster, and you'll see this in my roster projection, I had the Falcons carrying 26 offensive players already, but because they're going to carry a fullback, because they're probably going to carry 4 tight ends, sort of Arthur Smith's thing, it's really hard to also then carry 3 quarterbacks. You sort of have to pick, are you going to carry 3 quarterbacks, or are you going to carry 6 wide receivers, or are you going to carry, and maybe there's some wiggle room with the offensive line. Maybe they keep just 8, but I sort of have a hard time believing that. I think they're going to want to keep 9 offensive linemen at least. So the math is getting dicey there for how to keep all these guys. I'm certainly pulling for Franks. I think he's a fun player. Obviously tested out as a really good athlete at quarterback, good athlete at tight end as well. I think he was over a 9 RAS at tight end too. Just a big dude. So if he can succeed in that way as well as a quarterback, I think that'll help him make the roster. And, right now it's sort of a pet project thing for Arthur Smith, but it's intriguing. And if he can actually grow in that role, he hasn't played tight end much. If he can actually get on the field, it's valuable to be able to play quarterback in a pinch, to have that emergency guy, that third guy. So I'm rooting for him. I hope he makes it work. So it's glad to see him making some plays out there. We did also get a few peeks into the cornerback depth chart, which frankly, it's really crowded. They brought in 13 guys. There's a ton of DBs brought in. The same thing with wide receivers. Arthur Smith did make a note of it in his press conference recently, that they're emphasizing skill players in these non-padded, non-contact practices, because it's easier to evaluate those guys in these situations. The coverage and the receiving, that sort of stuff. You can get a much clearer picture of those guys without contact, as opposed to the contact-focused positions. So they're going to carry a large number of these DBs and wide receivers, and then they're probably going to trim those groups and bring in more trench players when training camp starts. At least that's what Smith was saying. So there's a lot of guys on the roster now, a decent number of them, 2 to 3 at wide receiver and corner, are probably possibly going to get cut going into camp because those other positions are a lot thinner. So we'll see what happens with that. But AJ Terrell was there. Veteran Casey Hayward was not there. So we did get to see Darren Hall playing, I guess, mostly on the outside opposite AJ Terrell. I know some people thought he was more of a slot guy. Last year he played some in the slot. But it looks like he's going to get the first shot basically to be the like fourth cornerback, the primary backup. And at least that's what it looked like during this OTA session. Darren Hall out there across from AJ Terrell. In the slot with Isaiah Oliver is going to be the starter there, ostensibly, assuming he comes back healthy soon. But he's still not back to team stuff. He was present, but he hasn't worked his way back to like team drills yet. So it was actually veteran signing Mike Ford, who's mostly known for his special teams. He was actually getting the start in the slot. So that'll be interesting. I think Mike Ford's actually been a solid reserve corner when called upon. Not a bad player, certainly. So it's interesting to see him get the work there. So that probably shows you that the team actually likes Mike Ford quite a bit. And he might be one of the favorites for the roster. I know I've had him making the roster as like the 5th or 6th corner in most of my projections. So keep an eye on that one as well. And then obviously we're going to be monitoring Isaiah Oliver. It's good to know that he's there, but I would be surprised if he wasn't back with team stuff by training camp based on his timeline. But until then, there's not really any reason to rush it, to be completely honest. He's been in the defense for a season. He's been with the team a long time. He's a veteran at this point, so no need to rush him back necessarily. The next spot we were getting a look into in terms of the competition is actually a returner, which I wrote it in the article that I did writing up these notes, that it's like funny that we went out and signed Cordarrelle Patterson and he's on the roster, but we're like having this giant competition at returner because guess what? Cordarrelle Patterson's suddenly too valuable to play returner because he's so important on offense. So congratulations to Cordarrelle Patterson. He's graduated away from returner because he's too darn good to play there now. So it looks like obviously Avery Williams is going to be the favorite once again. He was actually really good last year after Patterson sort of transitioned to his more offensive role, both on kicks and punts. He's moving to running back, so that does add like a little bit more intrigue to it. But I think honestly, him being like the 4th running back or whatever probably makes him easier to carry on the roster than at corner. Just because I think Avery Williams is like a game player. Like he's going to give maximum effort, but like at his size, he's just not going to be able to match up against certain players in the slot. Like he's just absolutely not an option. Even CeeDee Lamb, who's not like a massive receiver, like he was just too big for him. Like he could not cover him. He's very limited at corner. He is very good at special teams. Like he's a willing tackler. He's a great athlete. But at corner, it's just his size was always going to be a limiting factor. At running back, it's not as big a deal. Like height isn't very important at running back. Maybe in pass pro it helps a little bit, but he was already playing in the 190s according to his listed weight. So if he can just bulk up to that 200 range, he's pretty much a low end already in terms of weight running back. So I like Avery Williams still to be the returner, but there's going to be a lot of guys getting opportunities. I guess during these OTAs, we saw Damiere Byrd, who actually does have a lot of punt and kick return experience. I think he even has a kickoff return touchdown or a punt return touchdown in the NFL. So he's someone that can do it as well. He was getting some reps there. Brian Edwards, the recent trade addition, he's getting some reps there. I'm kind of surprised by that considering he's probably going to be a starter at receiver. And also Olamide Zaccheaus, who has worked there before. And then UDFA lacrosse to quarterback to wide receiver convert Jared Bernhardt also getting some return reps. So those are the guys that are going to factor in at least early on in that competition. We may see some more guys rotated. And I know Austin Trammell was working on the returns last year in training camp, so maybe he'll get a shot there as well. But those look like the guys, at least early on, that are working at returner. And then at gunner, which is a big deal in terms of making the roster for these back-end guys, Avery Williams, cornerback Mike Ford and wide receiver Kaderil Hodge were the ones that were getting a lot of the reps at gunner. So keep an eye on the guys working at gunner, because those are the guys that are your prime special teamers, your really valued special team contributors. And I would say that all three of those guys, if they're getting a lot of work at gunner and they're playing well at gunner, they're probably having a significant advantage for the roster. Mike Ford was starting in the slot too, so if that holds up, it seems like he's definitely got a clear path to the roster. Avery Williams, if he's playing both returner and one of the primary gunner spots, that obviously means that he doesn't have to necessarily do a ton at running back to get that last spot if he's primarily playing special teams. And then Kaderil Hodge, he's like a serviceable receiver, but he has been a really, really good special teams player throughout his career. That's sort of how he's stuck around. So I've always sort of viewed him as a favorite for one of those like final two receiver spots because of those special team contributions. So early on, it looks like that's holding. Finally, we have a little note on the offensive line. I guess Drew Dahlman in this particular practice was actually getting the starting nod. So that is interesting. It looks like there will be an actual competition for center. You have to think that Matt Hennessy probably is still the favorite because he did start all last season and wasn't bad. I think his run blocking was quite good in a few games. The pass blocking was not good in many games. So he needs to improve the pass blocking a lot, but the run blocking is there. So he's at least half of an offensive lineman at this point. But, Dahlman, we didn't see a ton of reps. I think we saw like 100 reps from him all season or something like that. He graded out well according to PFF. I mean, I think he looked good in those limited reps. So I think there will be an actual competition there. We'll see who comes out ahead. But I think between those two, the Falcons are probably okay at center. I like those two guys. Either it's Hennessy taking a step forward or Dahlman finally getting a chance to start. I like that. The bigger question obviously is still Mayfield, who seems to be sort of the unquestioned starter at left guard still. So we'll see how that shakes out if he does actually get any competition from anyone else. There was one more note, which was that after practice, Arthur Smith mentioned about the depth chart, that basically saying that they're going to work in a lot of players during OTAs and minicamp with the starters in particular. Like they're going to work in a lot of these guys. So don't put too much stock into who's getting rotated in or not or whatever. So just, don't like freak out about, D. Alford, the corner, is getting reps with the starters. Is he going to start this year? They're trying to rotate in all these players to give them a chance to work with the starters, see how they look against that higher level of competition, especially early on. And he did also mention that, as they get closer to the season, those first and second team spots are going to take on a lot more meaning. So we're going to see a lot of mixing and matching, I believe, over the next couple of weeks. And then, things will probably get a little more settled as we get into training camp. But that's pretty much all the main notes there. We're going to have another show, obviously, on Wednesday, which I think will overlap a little bit with mandatory minicamp. I don't know exactly how much we're going to have at that point in terms of reporting, but we'll talk about it if we can. I'll have some guests on to talk about what their opinions are on these OTA notes as well. And we'll see if any more signings come in or any other roster moves. But this is the slowest part of the calendar. After mandatory minicamp's over, that's pretty much it until training camp gets started. So, we'll see. But we're almost there. We're coming up on, roughly a month until training camp. So the home stretch of the dead zone is upon us. Just got to get through one more month, guys, of limited content. But I do appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening today. Thank you all for hanging out. I don't know if you guys can hear. Someone has decided they're going to mow right outside my window right as I end this pod. So apologize for that. But thank you guys for tuning in. Do give us a like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Also, check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/Falcoholic Live. If you haven't checked that out yet, it's a great way to support the show. We're currently doing our training camp fundraiser. So if you want to contribute to that, the link to that is in the show description, streamlabs.com/ the Falcoholic, I think. Check the show description to make sure you get the right one. But we appreciate all the donations to that, guys, as I'm trying to cover all 8-10 days of training camp this year. I will try to be there every single day. So bringing you guys that sweet content, basically. And like I said, subscribe, leave a comment if you're on the YouTubes. Those help us out. I try to read and respond to those when I can, so thanks for that, guys. But otherwise, I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. We'll see you guys on Wednesday for the next episode of the Falcoholic Live. Until then, guys, have a great day. We'll see you then. Bye, guys.